This is Caesar, Book 4, Chapters 35 and the beginning of 36. And this passage basically describes the battle that Caesar has predicted will happen, and then what occurs after the battle regarding peace with the enemy. So it begins with Caesar etsi videbat. Caesar, although he was considering, that implied idem quod, the same thing which acciderat had happened, superioribus diebus. And that, even though we would typically translate diebus as days, I think it works better here to just say on former occasions, fore would happen. So putting that all together, Caesar, although he was considering that the same thing which acciderat had happened on former occasions, fore would happen, ut that si essent hostes pulsi, if the enemy had been defeated, effugorant, they would flee, periculum, from danger, and then finally celeritate, with or by speed. So, two notes about the construction of this part of the passage. From the idem to the fore is an indirect statement depending on the videbat, so Caesar considering. And that fore is equivalent to futurum esse, and that's an infinitive just because of, again, the indirect statement. And then the ut down here to the effugorant is a result clause that's basically describing what this idem, what the same thing up here is. So it continues, tamen, however, noctus, having obtained possession of, and that's all included in this one word, so however, having obtained possession of, equites cerciter triginta, around 30 horsemen. It's just important to note that equites is horsemen, not horses here. Quos which comius, the attribation, and so this quos is still referring to the equites. De quo, and this is now talking about comius, so of whom ante, before, dictum est, mention was made, and this translation works just because that verb right there is passive. So putting that together, however, having obtained possession of around 30 horsemen, which comius, the attribation of whom before mention was made, he transportaverat, had brought over, secum, with him, he constituit, drew up or arranged the legiones, the legions, in acie pro castris, in battle lines before the camp. And just one note about this passage is that the acie is an old genitive, so even though I translated it as in battle lines, it might be more technically translated as he arranged the legions in order of battle, just because it is a genitive right there. And the underlined parts here, I'm just highlighting how those lines are all talking about the what it was that Caesar had obtained possession of. This part starts off with an ablative absolute that's also an idiom. So with the battle having begun, the hostes, enemies, non potuerant, were not able, fere, to bear, the nostrorum militum impetum, the attack of our soldiers, diutius, for a long time, ac, and where terunt terga, they turned their backs. And this is also an idiom, so instead of saying turn their backs, it can just be taken as fled. So altogether, one more time, with the battle having begun, the enemies were not able to bear the attack of our soldiers for a long time and fled. So they, talking about Caesar's men, secuti, pursued, quos, the men, and that's talking about their enemies, so they pursued the men, tanto spatio, by so great a distance, and that's an ablative of means, quantum, so much as, potuerant, they were able, efficere, to accomplish, with, and then these two ablatives, curso, with their speed, et viribus, and strength. And then an implied and here continues to the next clause, so They killed complores a great number, or a great many, exees from them. So putting it all together, they, meaning Caesar's men, pursued the men by so great a distance, so much as they were able to accomplish with their speed and strength, and they killed a great many from them. And up here I just underline these adverbs because there's so many of them they get kind of confusing when you're trying to translate. And this is the last line of chapter 35. It says deinde then, and then followed by a pretty long ablative absolute. So omnibus longe late quae dificis incensis. So with all the buildings or homes incensis having been burned, and then longe lateque is far and wide. They receperunt say they took themselves back in castra to their camp. So altogether, then with all the buildings or houses having been burned far and wide, they took themselves back to their camp. And then this is the only line of chapter 36 that we'll translate, and it starts off Eodem die, which is translated as on the very same day, legati ab hostibus missi, so ambassadors having been sent by the enemies, venerunt de pace ad Caesarem, so they came to Caesar, and then about peace or concerning peace, basically just stating that they were coming to Caesar in order to negotiate a peace treaty.